Hey all, welcome back. I have the day off today and I'm going to be using that time to rebuild this planted freshwater fish tank I have right over here. As a lot of you know who've been following me on here, I have quite a few hobbies, and during quarantine I picked up another one, which was scaping these smaller planted freshwater tanks. I kind of fell down a YouTube rabbit hole watching a lot of these scaping videos and ended up with these two tanks here because I just love finding ways to bring the outdoors inside. And even though I'm relatively new to this hobby, I do pride myself on scaping really beautiful and natural looking scapes. But I've always kind of felt like the lights that are necessary for the plants in the aquarium to grow detract from the whole look of the scape. I thought I would run to the hardwood store and pick up a couple pieces of nicer walnut that I can then use to elevate these lights and make it look a lot more cohesive with the scape. So let's get into it. I have two tanks. One is a 12-gallon long tank that I will be scaping today, and the other is a 5.5-gallon bowl, where a couple snails and my older betta reside. I recently renamed him from Ghost to the Bloody Baron, like in Harry Potter, because his color slowly shifted from a pure white to this pinkish, reddish, and white mixture that definitely gave off more of a Bloody Baron vibe. So I have a bunch of the plants that I'll be using in this jar, staying nice and wet, and then I also have a peace lily that I will be putting in the top of the tank. It won't be submerged, but yeah, more plants in the tank, keep it healthier. And honestly, I've done a peace lily in a tank before and it's worked really, really well. Another jar of plants. This is gonna be a very lush landscape, which is exactly what I want. I have to give Kyle a little shout out because when I'm redoing these scapes, I'll have just little mason jars everywhere with like plants. And even with my first tank, I decided to do the wall stud method, which basically involves taking dirt and soil straight from outside and then putting it in your tank. But first you have to bake it. So he came home and I just had a cookie sheet with tin foil and a huge layer of dirt that I was baking. So really I'm living the dream because I have a husband that's cool with me baking dirt in our oven. I had already taken out all of the plants and hardscape, which is the rocks and wood, as well as a few ghost shrimp that were in the tank, but I still needed it to be fully emptied, so I pulled the tank stand away from the wall so that I could easily work around it. This stand was originally a large coffee table. I turned the metal base on its side and cut the top piece of wood to fit the new orientation, and voila, a sturdy stand was made. Since the base is heavy-duty metal tubing and the piece of wood underneath the tank is rather thick, this is a very sturdy stand that can support the heavy weight of all the hardscape and water in these tanks. My gravel vac wasn't working, so I had to empty the entire tank by hand, which is a little more tedious, but it didn't take too much time since it's only 12 gallons. So now I'm going to start on the new scape with putting some nutrients at the bottom and then capping it all with sand before I start playing around with how all the plants, the hardscape is going to sit. A lot of what I've learned on how to set up a filterless planted fish tank has come from the channel MD Fish Tanks. I'll link his channel in my description as he does much more in-depth dives into the setup, but basically to start you need a bottom layer of nutrients capped with a good layer of sand or gravel. A trick I learned from him is using these small mesh bags filled with aqua soil and small pieces of root tabs at the bottom, and then capping that with sand. This helps keep the aqua soil and nutrients from slowly working their way up to the top of the sand. For the capping layer, I decided to do a combination of fine white sand and multicolored gravel, mostly because I had leftover of both, but also because it gives, in my opinion, a much more natural river bottom look. The pieces of stone I'm using are new, but this large driftwood piece is being reused from a previous tank setup. New driftwood has to be soaked or boiled before being put in a planted tank, but since this piece has already been prepped and established in my old tank, it is good to go. I played around with different orientations and placements for the hardscape before landing on a layout that I really liked. Once the hardscape was situated, I started bringing in the plants. About half of the plants were from my previous tank and half of them were brand new. The plants from my previous well-established tank had lots of healthy bacteria on them that would help establish this new tank and create a healthy system a lot quicker. A little trick I've learned to help weigh down the plants so they don't float to the top is using Gorilla Super Glue Gel to glue the plant to the top of the rock so that the rock can weigh it down. This is a very common trick in aquascaping, and the dried super glue won't harm the fish. Using a plastic bag to help evenly distribute water so as not to destroy this brand new scape, I started filling the tank back up. At this point, the planted tank was basically done. Since I had reused a bunch of plants and I also took some filter medium from a well-established tank and put it in this new tank, the cycling process would go really quick. I considered a couple different options for stocking the tank, but ultimately decided to just go with the betta fish because I just love keeping them. Very exciting, I just got my betta fish from Vegas Betta. The UPS guy literally just dropped him off, so let's get this guy out of here. They did a pretty good job packing him in with styrofoam, and there's a nice little heat pad. He looks so pretty. It's kind of a small bag though, but I mean, he looks really healthy. While I waited for the new betta fish to acclimate to the temperature of the water, I also unpacked some additional Java ferns I had picked up just to make the tank feel extra lush. Plus, the more plants the better when it comes to a filterless tank. The peace lily had just been propped up next to the driftwood, but it wasn't staying quite upright, so I DIY'd a little suction cup zip tie holder to keep it in place. This worked perfectly to keep it upright and make sure the roots were submerged, but the rest of the plant was above water. The new betta seemed a little timid at first, but after a couple minutes, he was busy exploring the rest of his tank and seemed quite interested in his surroundings. Alright, so I'm not even gonna lie, it's actually been a couple of days since I last did some work on this whole project. In the meantime, this little guy has settled in really nicely. So have the shrimp and the singular snail that is also in this tank. You probably can't see from there, but there's a little bubble nest that he's started to blow, which is a good indication that he's settling in and starting to feel like this is home. Originally, my plan was to use the walnut wood not only to create a elevated stand to keep the light off of the tank, but I was also thinking I would use it to create a cover over the black part of the light. But the more I thought about that, I think it's just going to be a little too heavy and not really work out the way I'm envisioning it would. So I'm going to cut that and just keep the light how it is, all black, which I think will still look really nice. But I'm still going to push it off the top of the tank by 8 or so inches so that one, the light isn't a distraction from the overall scape, which I want to be the centerpiece. And then 2, it'll also make sure the light is slightly diffused so we don't get an overgrowth of algae in this tank, which has been an issue for me in the past. And algae doesn't hurt the fish, it's just not very pretty. So today I'm hoping to finish that up, and then I can push this whole stand with the tanks up against the wall and set it back up the way I had it before and get it all permanently situated. So this is the light that I had on the smaller fish bowl, and I want to do a very similar thing for the bigger light. I just need to figure out exactly what's gonna work best since it is a little longer and heavier. But basically this light originally had this wire thing here that would slide in and out and had maybe a 1/2 inch lift off of the top of the tank, which was too low. And I used that same piece of wire that it came with to mount it into the light, but it can slide in and out right here, and then mount it also down into this piece of wood. The wire is glued into the piece of wood to make sure that it won't fall out. But the nice thing is if this light ever breaks on me, I can remove it from the wire. But while it's on there, it's very sturdy and it won't come out. I found that how high this has kept the light off of the fishbowl is really working for that tank, so I'm probably going to take that into consideration when setting up the longer light. I'm gonna be honest, I kind of went with the flow on this one and strategized as I went. But I decided to create the stand using a piece of 2.5 inch by 3/4 inch piece of walnut that I cut and then joined on the mitered edges. I then used my Japanese handsaws to cut out an indentation where the top of the light would sit. I had never got around to finishing the stand for the bowl light, so I sanded both pieces down and put on a couple coats of wipe-on polyurethane. Originally, I had considered capping the top metal part of the light with a piece of walnut, but when I played around with a few ideas, I ultimately decided to use a black metal bracket I had lying around as a top layer to keep the light in place. The bracket was screwed into the wood, so if the light ever did die on me, I could easily replace it. Overall, I thought the whole space came together nicely, and it got me one step closer to turning my whole desk area into a little jungle. This is a funky little project. I feel like it's always fun when you can combine 2 of your interests to create something cool. And yeah, really happy with how it all came together. Really like the scape. There's a lot of people out there who have different feelings about what an aquascape should look like. In my opinion, as long as you're happy with it, if you think it's cool, that's what matters, and I'm really happy with how mine turned out. I'll keep my eye on the water quality as well, keep testing for a while just to make sure we don't have any ammonia spikes. Since it's just one betta fish, a snail, and a couple of ghost shrimp, I'm not too worried about that as that's not a really heavy bioload in there. And I have a decent amount of plants along with that peace lily to really help filter out that tank. So I'm not too worried, but I just will keep checking for a while to make sure that it's a fully stable ecosystem we have going on in there. Anyways, I have no really good name ideas for this guy. The only thing that kept coming to mind was tiger, but I think that's a pretty lame name for a fish. So if you think of anything better, please comment it below and maybe I'll name my fish after what you suggest. All right, all, hope you have a great rest of your week and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.